remarks in a minute, just to let you guys know. We'll be the presenters today. Huh?
You do it.
Oh, that's crazy. Sorry, I'm like running into you. Hello, hello, hello. Just to let you guys know, we will be starting in almost. Actually, now. So, good morning. My name is Claudia Juarez. I go by she, her, hers. I am currently studying art here. I am a junior, and I am this year's coordinator for Student Council of Multicultural Affairs. This is my second CEAD conference, and I am also thankful that you have taken out the time of your day to be here today and continue to learn and share this experience with us.
Good morning. My name is Raylyn. My pronouns are she, her. I am the president of the Stereotypes Club, the Native American Student Council. This is my first CEAD conference, and I'm excited to join you guys.
Before we officially start our program, we have some housekeeping items and a short overview of today's schedule. First on your name tags is a QR code that links the program for the day, and you can find those just flipping your name tags on the back side. Oh, yeah, the QR code is displayed on this slide behind me as well. We also have some printed programs for those that do not have a device with us today. The program as well where you'll find today's schedule along with other information such as foundational definitions, terms often used when practicing diversity, equity, and inclusion work. Please take a moment to review your program. Feel free to reach out to any of our CEAD volunteers. You can see them kind of all around. They have the DIAB shirt staff or this PANA staff t-shirt if you have any questions about today.
And then here's a list of our current schedule for this morning. We'll open the conference right now at 9 o'clock, followed by a land acknowledgement, and then followed by our keynote address by Dr. Jeremiah Sims. Immediately after his keynote presentation, we'll have a short break and then come back for a workshop session led by Dr. Sims. He'll guide us as we dive deeper to explore the significance of race, equity, inclusion, and justice work in our current climate. We'll have a 10-minute break around 10:15 after the keynote address and before the workshop session. After the workshop, we invite you to join us for lunch and conversation. Lunch will be served in the foyer. Then we're scheduled to We're scheduled to close shortly after 1 p.m., but please feel free to stick around and have conversation.
Please make sure your devices are off so we do not disturb our keynote speaker or each other, and keep that muted. Not that, but please keep it muted until the remainder of the conference is over. Morning refreshments will remain in the Badgley foyer until after our morning break is over, so please feel free to help yourself at any time throughout the conference. Restrooms are located throughout Badgley, and gender-exclusive restrooms are located just right side Badgley Hall, down that little hallway out there you saw. Yeah, I'm so sorry.
We invited a photographer to take pictures of us. If you do not want your photo taken, no worries. Please have a red dot on your name tag indicating to the photographer to not take photos of you. Our keynote address will also be presented and recorded and available after on EOU's Mounting Network YouTube channel.
At this time, we would like to share our community agreements. A community agreement is a shared agreement about how we want to share this space we are in as we learn and grow together. It helps us identify concrete ways to create an inclusive community and talk through difficult conversations without minimizing conflict. While minimizing conflict, apologize. Using these practices, we can intentionally challenge ourselves and each other's while still recognizing the different experiences we are all coming from. These community agreements are also included in your program. We encourage you to use them as guiding principles as you would go and engage in conversation throughout the conference.
Our first is to stay engaged and be fully present. Investing in the time to be present and staying engaged allows us to maximize this opportunity to listen and learn even when we feel confused and uncomfortable. Pay attention to when you are shutting down or not wanting to listen, and use strategies to help you stay present. Discomfort and anxiety are normal parts of courageous conversations and learning. If what is being said creates an emotional response in you, be extra aware and challenge yourself to listen and be open-minded to hearing the full intent and meaning of what is being shared. Allyship is about actively reframing knowledge and actively changing power dynamics.
Second, keep an open mind and listen with intent. As you listen to people share their knowledge and experiences, it's important to keep an open mind as you actively listen with intent. Rather than listening immediately for what's right or wrong, entertain that a truth can involve multiple perspectives and recognize that multiple things are true about any given subject. Keeping an open mind allows for growth by learning from mistakes, allowing you to participate more in difficult conversations with a growth mindset. Oh, sorry. As you move through your own self-reflection today, please remember to be kind and have compassion for yourself. Stepping out of your comfort zone is scary and disorienting sometimes. You're bound to make mistakes, and that's okay. Be sure to take a moment when you need it. Get some fresh air, get water, or step away and take some time to yourself before coming back to the conversation. And like I said, please feel free to exit anytime you feel you need to take a breath or discomfort. Please feel free.
It is also important to lean into your discomfort. One way to think about this is learn to be comfortable with the discomfort. As we intentionally lean into difficult and uncomfortable conversations, we acknowledge that our individual and collective learning is going to be difficult, even a bit messy, and will happen over time. Sometimes our values and the way we understand things will be challenged. We acknowledge that the process of unlearning ideas and beliefs can be uncomfortable. Remember, we're here to learn and grow, both individually and collectively. We won't fix it all in one conversation, but we will get closer to if we all are willing to learn and lean into our discomfort.
Fourth, expect and accept non-closure. Engaging in conversations on diversity, equity, and inclusion means that there will be times of no closure. That's because this is an ongoing work that does not necessarily leave you walking away feeling like everything turned out the way you hoped. Be willing to take risks and accept that much of this is about changing yourself, not others. Therefore, we must commit to an ongoing dialogue and a journey of growth together.
And fifth, share lessons, not details. This community agreement is about confidentiality. We aim to create a brave space where everyone's experiences and stories are equally valued and respected. Please remember the conversations today are confidential. We might use examples from our own experiences during our time together. If someone's experience moves you to where you want to share with others, please share these experiences you've learned and not about the details. While it's okay to reference or talk about these experiences outside of this space, it's not okay to use names or share anyone's personal information without their explicit consent.
And finally, assume best intentions. Everyone comes in with a different set of experiences and knowledge. Seek first to understand. Assume best intentions is on all interactions, but acknowledge impact. We are all here to learn and grow as individuals, and we are using the best terminology that we know to understand and help us understand. It is important to take responsibility for the impact we have with our best intentions when our best intentions have a negative impact.
We acknowledge there are institutional, systematic, and structural barriers that perpetrate inequality, that have silenced the voices of communities over time. We are committed to partnership, co-creation, and co-ownership of solutions with communities whose voices and identities are underrepresented. In the educational system, we are striving to engage with BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and other underrepresented communities through deliberate, structured, emergent, and best practice processes, especially with students and communities that experience institutional, systematic, and structural barriers. You cannot fit someone into a box.
Today we are hosted by Eastern Oregon University, which rests on the indigenous lands of the Nez Perce, also known as Nimiipuu, the Cayuse, Umatilla, and Walla Walla, all of whom made their homes throughout the Northeast Oregon region. We celebrate their traditions, languages, and stories. We acknowledge their continuing connection to this land, water, and community, and pay our respects to these original stewards of Northeast Oregon.
Acknowledging the land is a transformative act that recognizes the erasure of indigenous peoples. To commemorate their connections to this land, to encourage people to think about what it means to occupy space on indigenous lands, and to show gratitude and pay our respects to the indigenous communities in this place that we gather. It is equally important to understand the long-standing history that has brought us to live and work on the land and to seek to understand our place within that history. Land acknowledgements do not exist in the past tense or the historical context. Colonialism is an ongoing process, and we need to build our mindfulness on our present and current participation. We invite you to take a moment to recognize and honor the traditional indigenous peoples of the land upon which you reside.
February is Black History Month. It's a time to celebrate the fullness of African American history and culture. At EOU, we honor Black History Month and join our community and nation in celebrating the history of Black African Americans and their many contributions throughout our nation. We also invite you to reflect on where we have been and where we hope to be, as we collaborate as a community to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion across our campus and in our community. Please join us in a series of events and activities on campus this month dedicated to celebrating the achievements, resilience, and impactful legacies of state's Black African American individuals and community members.
As Claudia mentioned, our campus will host various programs that showcase and celebrate the achievements, resilience, and impactful legacies of Black people and community members. Our intent is to foster a deeper understanding of Black history and its importance in shaping our society and community. These events aim to promote dialogue, understanding, and an appreciation for a pivotal role of the Black African American history in shaping our collective identities and histories. We encourage everyone to attend and support these diverse programs that enrich our campus community. Experience the richness of Oregon Black history and culture through an informational exhibit that delves into the remarkable journey of Letitia Carson, a formerly enslaved Black Oregon homesteader, farmer, and influential figure during the era of Oregon's exclusion laws of 1844. The exhibit, An Enduring Spirit of Hope and Freedom, is the product of an ongoing partnership between Oregon Black Pioneers, Oregon State University, the Oregon Land Trust, and the Lynn Benton NAACP. We are honored to host this exhibit on campus, and this is currently on display at the EOU Library until April 10th.
Join founder and executive director of Maxville Heritage Center, Gwen Trice, as she shares the African American history of Maxville, Oregon, and Walla Walla County. Built in 1923 by the Bowman Hicks Lumber Company of Kansas City, Missouri, Maxville would grow to roughly 400 residents, becoming one of the largest towns in the region. And despite Oregon exclusion laws that prevented African Americans from settling in, Maxville would attract both Black and white lumber workers who together would navigate the intricacies of segregation to form an interracial community. Gwen will be presenting Reclaiming Maxville, the Legacy of African Americans in a Lumber Town next week on Thursday, February 22nd from 1 to 2:30 p.m. Went too far. Today, we are truly honored to welcome Dr. Jeremiah Jameson this morning. His keynote presentation is titled, "We Are the Ones We've Been Waiting For, Radically Reimagining Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Justice." The equity rooted in love practice will frame our conversations on the need for equity work and how it is incumbent upon one of us to engage in the reflective hard work necessary to contribute to a more equitable and just society where we can all thrive together. Dr. Sims is the co-founder and principal consultant of Rooted in Love, LLC, as the inaugural director of equity for the College of San Mateo. Dr. Sims brings a wealth of experience to his commitment to educational equity, especially for hyper-marginalized students. Born in Oakland and raised in Richmond, California, his journey has fueled his dedication to breaking down barriers in education. As an alumnus of the University of California, Berkeley, Dr. Sims holds a BA in rhetoric with honors, as well as an MA and a PhD in language literacy and culture. His impactful work is documented in his first book, Revolutionary STEM Education, Critical Reality, Pedagogy, and Social Justice and STEM for Black Males. The book delves into Dr. Sims' experience as an educator striving for a paradigm shift in STEM education for Black boys.
In his second book, Minding the Obligation Gap in Community Colleges, Dr. Sims sheds light on the vital role community college practitioners must embrace to deconstruct institutionalized inequities in higher education. He is also the editor of the Peter Lane book series, Educational Equity in Community Colleges. His most recent contribution, The White Educator's Guide to Equity, Teaching for Justice in Community College. Further, he solidifies his commitment to creating equitable educational environment by encouraging all educators to commit to radical love as praxis. As an educator, administrator, speaker, author, and consultant, Dr. Sims resides in the East Bay area in California with his wife, Rachel, and his 6 boys, Judah, Malachi, Zion, Freedom, Jehu, and Justice. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Jeremiah Sims.
What's up? Let me find it. Can you hear me? I'm really bad at microphones, so if you can't hear me in the back, just do this, and then I'll know to raise the microphone. And actually, that's an older bio. I need to correct that. We live in Redding, California now, which is a paradigm shift in and of itself. But I'm loving it, though. My wife and I recently purchased a small school. It's called Acton Academy Redding, and so in addition to having 6 boys of our own, I have an additional 50 kids that I take care of on a daily basis because 6 is not enough, apparently. So anyway, we're going to start with an exercise. And so I want to introduce this exercise, and I need you all to listen very carefully, which is not to insinuate that you were not going to listen very carefully, but I'm going to give you instructions. They're not written down, so you're going to have to remember them, okay? So who here has ever made a paper airplane? Raise your hand. All right, so we got some ringers in here. Is anybody an engineering student or an engineer? Not yet? Okay, that may change after this. Who knows? All right, so what's going to happen? All right, so this is the part that you have to have clarity on. We're going to do teams or pairs, whoever's closest to you, right? So here's a team, right? It doesn't matter to me how big your team is. Some people say you have too many cooks in the kitchen. There's no such thing as too many cooks in the kitchen. There's such thing as too many chefs in the kitchen, right? So we have to be clear about that. So that team may be too big. You may want to split. So you don't want to do this by yourself. Whatever your pair, triad, whatever your team looks like, that's who you have. And this is timed, okay? And there's a winner, but I didn't bring your prize, but I'll send you a prize after I get your address, all right? So here's the thing. I mean, you got to travel light, and I was trying to get in and get out. Okay, so here's the thing. Every team is going to get 2 minutes to conceptualize what their paper airplane is going to look like. You can draw it out. You can do whatever you want to do. You can talk it through. You cannot touch the piece of paper that I give you until I say go, at which point you have let's say I'll give you 3 minutes to construct your paper airplane. Then you're going to send a representative up here with me, and we're going to see which one flies the furthest, okay? All right, got it? So what did I say? Everybody gets 1 piece of paper, 2 minutes to conceptualize, 3 minutes to build. As soon as I say time on that, you send your representative up here. Actually, to control for flight, I may just throw all the paper airplanes myself, right? And then that makes sense. Okay, so I'm going to get ready to pass the paper out. I'll put the microphone down for a second. Huh? Oh, yeah. No, this is special. So, because that time to think about it. So you have 1 minute. In 1 minute, I'm going to say go, and then you have to build. Once those 3 minutes are up, I'm going to say in. Send your representative up here with your piece of paper. So I just want to be clear. So far, I've done what I said I was going to do, right? I said I was going to give everybody the same amount of time with one piece of paper. I did that, right? Okay, let's go. Time. You can touch your paper now. Start to build. You have 3 minutes. Okay, thank you. If you're finished before the time is up, send your representative on here. Oh, I'm sorry. You need a team name, too. You got to come up with a team name. That's it. If your plane is ready, come on up. Send your representative up. You have 90 seconds.
That's going to take.
This gets serious, friends. All right. So we're going to line up over here. Folks that have it. 60 seconds. So if I can't do 40, hold it. All right, so everybody has to clear out there. We're going to take the eyes out. So what happened? Was that fair? Huh? Was it equal? I'm a rhetorician. I will argue with y'all all day, and I'm really good at it, that it was equal because I did exactly what I said I was going to do. So I was going to everybody a certain amount of time and one piece of paper. So who didn't get a piece of paper? Okay, then you can't complain to me about it not being equal. Was it equitable? It wasn't equitable. So what's the difference? What's the difference between the two? So we're going to unpack that. But you know what's funny? This always happens. I do this all the time. I just like to make messes for people, right? So some people got paper that was balled up, right? I want to show you something with these paper airplanes. So starting from here, and this is balled up, right? Because that's the furthest plane. What would happen if I just did that, right? That one wins. But it's not a archetypical, it's not the way that we conceptualize, it's not our prototype for what a paper airplane looks like, right? Oftentimes in educational spaces, we get students, right? You as students encounter educators who want to unfurl you first and make you into something else when you can fly just the way that you are, right? So we have to think about that. What does that mean about shifting our paradigm? Does it have to look a certain way? And we know that that's the case with hyper-marginalized students, and I'll explain that word later, right? But with hyper-marginalized students, rarely do we accept them as they are. We make them check some aspect of their culture, their belief system, their linguistic kind of predilections. We make them check those things at the door of the classroom in order to be viewed as people full of promise and potential, right? Has that happened to any of y'all, right? It happens. And so we need to figure out what it looks like to meet people where they are and allow them to fly the way that they are. And I'm going to tell you a story. I used to be a transfer student advisor at my alma mater, University of California, Berkeley, and I have permission to share this story. And there's a student who this story is incredible, right? And so remind me, I'm not going to say it now, but remind me later to tell you what the student's up to now. But I want to talk a little bit about the student's life. I have some notes, right? So this was a student that was born to a single mother. This single mother was reliant on welfare in order to support this student. The student's mother only went as far as high school with regard to her education. The student's father was a career criminal, so he was not someone who was part of the student's life, and so there were some issues that the student faced around that. When the students spent time around their father, there was it wasn't a good situation. There was abuse there, right? And I'm trying to retain anonymity, but y'all don't know who it is anyway, right? So I'm not gonna say any names, but anyway, what else? Then later, the student at about, I think, 8 or 9 years old, the student's mother married a man who was suffering from PTSD. But it was undiagnosed because this was a while ago. And so he was an abusive alcoholic. The student talks about a time where he was in a car with his mother and his stepfather, and his stepfather was abusing his mother. His mother jumped out of the moving car. Stepfather jumped out of the moving car to chase her and left this 4-year-old student in the car by himself. The car careened into a pole. The student was okay. Another time, this student told a story of how he saw his stepfather, and this is graphic, trigger warning, right, kick a hole in his mother's throat so that tissue came out of her neck and she nearly died. Talks about how the stepfather also abused him. Because you know there's a saying, right? There's a saying that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Right? I don't know if I really believe that. I feel like sometimes what doesn't kill you induces trauma, right? And so, which is not to say that there's not help available to work through those things, but for this student, they were in a place of depression, perpetual depression, because they were trying to wrestle with why these things happened to them, right? And I don't know if y'all know this is from epigenetics, but you know trauma can be written into your DNA, right? It's written into it, can change the way that certain things trigger you. When people say they're being triggered, right, it's because something unbeknownst to them is taking place and their body's responding. I went to an acupuncturist one time. I had really, really bad allergies when I lived in the Bay Area. And her contention, whether or not y'all believe this wholesale, her contention is that I'm not actually allergic to pollen. because I have my own trauma. She said that there was trauma that entered into my life at the same time the pollen did. My body is actually trying to expel the trauma, but it's confusing it for pollen, right? And so your body is trying to position you to be whole and to be free. This same student grew up in a violent environment, saw fratricidal violence, what's considered to be brother-on-brother violence for many years, lost friends to gun violence. Eventually, the student grew up in Section 8 housing, and the particular Section 8 housing complex that the student grew up in order to maintain the Section 8 voucher, which is government-subsidized rent, there couldn't be a man in the home. So it was a building filled with single mothers, right? Because if there was a man in the home, irrespective if he had income or not, it voided the Section 8 voucher, right? So it created a system where you had all these single mothers who were primarily black and brown. In high school, the student didn't do well, couldn't find his place. Eventually, the student went to community college, where he struggled. The student had a 1.1 GPA and was eventually asked to, or not asked to, but forced to leave community college, right? Which is not easy to do. They'll give you a lot of leeway. I went to community college for a long time myself. I'm just trying to make sure I got it. So eventually the student figured that education was a way towards upward mobility, a way to better his community. So he started to do better in community college. He went to community college transfer advisors and talked about his desire to go to a university, a local university. And they're like, well, maybe you should consider a trade. Nothing wrong with certificates, nothing wrong with trades. But this student expressed a desire to go to a four-year college, and he was continuously pushed towards vocational or certificates. Let's see what else. Eventually, the student did get into the college that he wanted to go to, and he went to share that information with a transfer advisor, and the transfer advisor said, are you sure you want to go there and compete with some of the brightest minds in the country? All right. But anyway, the student did make it to that college, did really, really well, is doing some amazing things now. So remind me before I leave to tell you what the student is up to today, because it's pretty cool, all right? So we're going to transition. I don't typically, or I shouldn't say typically, I have yet to offer land acknowledgments. This is not a value judgment. I think that y'all did a great job. It's not accusatory at all, but I'm still wrestling with some things internally. I grew up black, but I am also Choctaw, and so I've been leaning more into my indigeneity and trying to understand what it means for me. For whatever this means, it's a problematic metric. Meet the blood quantum. Actually, when I went to school, I was offered an indigenous scholarship, but I didn't accept it because I lived my life as black, and I didn't want to take that scholarship from someone else who was more deserving. But there's a book that I read recently. It's called Braiding Sweetgrass. If you haven't read that book, you have to check it out, by Professor Robin Wall Kimmerer. And she talks about the difference between, she's a scientist, a botanist, and she talks about the difference between kind of indigenous science and Western science. Western science is preoccupied with the body and the mind, right? Less so the body, more so the mind. There's a preoccupation there. What can we do that will impress, will inculcate people so that we can impress them in the mind? She said indigenous science is interested in those things too, but it's also interested in spirit, right? The spirit of the person. So when you are able to meld those things, then you have the potential for wholeness. And so the reason why we did this paper airplane exercise, talk a little bit about equity, talk a little bit about equality, right, and draw a distinction between the two. But I wanted to make the point that when you leave the paper in whatever condition it came in, right, we don't have to change it. That's anachronistic. And if I say a word that you don't understand, and you can't gather the meaning from context clues, and you can ask me about it later, okay? But you're going to have to write it down to do that, right? So it's an anachronistic view of education where we take unrefined coals, right, and put them through this kind of educational factory so that they come out refined, they come out diamonds on the other end. That's not what we need to do. We need to meet people where they are, allow them to have the full range of human experiences, value those experiences, welcome those experiences, not just tolerate those experiences, and protect those experiences so that people leave our institutions not just academically whole, but humanly whole, right? That matters. All right. So we are the ones we've been waiting for. I'm going to get to work on this. I can just click from right here. Oh, this is my crew right here. So we have 6 boys. That's Rachel, my better half. This is our school. Like I said, we have a school there in Redding, California. Judah is the oldest. He's 14. Malachi is almost 12. Zion will be 10. Jehu is 4. Freedom is 7. And Justice is 4 months. And I have a better picture later. He's so cute. Oh, my gosh. Those little cheeks, man, it's just like the best thing going. All right, we are the ones we have been waiting for. Even under the sea, we are the ones we have been waiting for. If you are free, you are not predictable, and you are not controllable. So here's some history. Is anybody familiar with the Yellow Power movement? This was based primarily in San Francisco and New York, right? It was a move for people who are considered to be Asian, and Asian is kind of a problematic amalgamation of so many different kinds of people, right? It's just a way to group people. In our society, it's a scientific, not necessarily scientific society, so we're worried about classification or kind of, I'm going to hit you with this word, but I think you know what it means, right? Classificatory moves. We want to be able to put people, compartmentalize people so that we can understand them, and sometimes so that we can subjugate them, right? Union movements, right? There are people who on both sides of the argument with regard to unions, but that we have an 8-hour workday, that we have certain rights now, right? Those rights were fought for by unions. But the crazy thing is, you know why unions don't have the same power that they used to have? Does anybody know why? Because of anti-blackness. They shot themselves in the foot because they didn't want to allow entrance to non-white peoples. And so they diminished not just the population that they had, but the negotiating power that they had because of racism and anti-blackness. And it's unfortunate that a movement started around rights failed because it was unwilling to level those rights out equally. There's Black Power movement. So Black Power movement was a response to the life and work of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who was radically nonviolent, and there were folks who were like, no, this is not okay. We need to be able to fight back. A lot of this kind of the Black Power movement was spurred by Frantz Fanon's book, The Wretched of the Earth, right? And one of the things that he argues in that book is that in order to communicate with your oppressor, you have to speak the language that they speak, and that language is violence, right? And so there were many groups, and that they kind of mistook that, but there were many groups that actually used, the IRA in Ireland, right? The folks who were fighting against the Shah in Iran. All throughout the world, there were people who took up the Wretched of the Earth as a kind of third world revolutionary Bible. Brown Power, this is a movement by folks who were Chicano, right? So Chicano is different, right? Because it is also acknowledging this kind of dual consciousness, right? Where you are have a stake in what happens in America, but you're also closely tied to your lineage. And so there was movements, there was Brown Berets, right, and Brown Power, and there was, at this time in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, there was movements and cross-representational solidarity, and those things matter, right? That's actually what shifts things. There's something that Heather McGee talks about in her book, The Sum of Us. She talks about the solidarity dividend. When people work together in solidarity, that power, it's unstoppable. There's no force that can resist that. So what has to happen if you want to maintain the status quo is you have to continue to divide people so that they won't work together. Are y'all familiar with the Fight for 15 that happened not too far from here in Washington? So in 2012, there was a movement by fast food workers, and they wanted to raise their wage because if y'all know anything about minimum wage, right, so some of y'all are young enough to where you just can walk into an In-N-Out, I don't know if y'all have In-N-Out Burger, but whatever the equivalent is here, In-N-Out Burger pays like $17.75. Right? I'm 48 years old. The first job I had paid $5.15 per hour, right? Because that's what the minimum wage. So that was, shoot, man, that was 33 years ago. It was I think $5.35. It's like $7.15 now in some places, right? And so it moves at a glacial pace. And so the folks in Washington, it was primarily folks of color who were working in these fast food places. They went on strike, and everybody's like, we don't care if you go on strike, we'll just hire more people. And so they're not the management. They were the people who were working at the level of food service. And so they weren't getting any traction on their fight for, it's called Fight for 15 because they were asking for $15 an hour. They wanted to go from $7.65 to $15 an hour. Those numbers might be not be exactly right, but it was 7-something to 15. And everybody's like, it's not going to happen. You're a bunch of uneducated folks. Nobody cares what you do. If you quit, you quit. We'll find more people to fill those voids. But they continued to fight, and they did something that the power structure didn't anticipate. They built solidarity with the folks who were racialized as white that worked there, right? The folks who were at management levels. And you know how they did that? It wasn't magic. I'm sure there was some prayer involved. They began to break bread together. They began to meet each other after work and talk. They began to organize. They had each other in their homes. They became friends. When that level of solidarity, right, struck, it was unstoppable. They didn't quite get to 15. The fight is ongoing. They got to, I think, 1375, which was unheard of. There is no other period where minimum wage has increased that much in that short a time, right? It was because of the solidarity that happened, right? So that's what happened. That's what was happening in these organizing movements, right? But that is what the power structure is most interested in deconstructing. It's a divide and conquer strategy. And we even see that in DEI work. Excuse me, y'all ever heard of Oppression Olympics? Right? So that happens. Somebody will say, well, we want a program that serves Latinx students who are first in family to go to college. And, well, what about us? Right? What about this group? What about that group? Right? As though every single thing has to address every single group. There are resources available. We can build solidarity. We can build community. We can build spaces that target particular groups to lift them up, because I believe a rising tide can lift all boats. If we use that resources to lift up Latinx students, and we know that it works because we've created more welcoming environments and they're persisting in college and graduating, how come we can't use some of those same things for other groups of students that are hyper-marginalized, right? Are y'all familiar with the Freedom Riders? Anybody know who the Freedom Riders were? Right? They did sit-ins. They were beaten. Some were murdered to protest segregation in the South. And this is a cross-representational group, right? This one here, where it says 20978, that's Stokely Carmichael, who would later become Kwame Ture. And one of the things that he argued, and I would argue this is incumbent of all of you, he said it's the job of the conscious to do what? To make the unconscious conscious, right? This is consciousness work. REIJ, race, equity, inclusion, and justice, is consciousness work. It's hard work, but it's also heart work. This was the protest in Tiananmen Square, where people were protesting communism and how totalitarian it was, and there were students who were wiped out protesting that, and this was in 1989. Students have always been central, right? I want to be clear about that. Students have always been central to the work, and so sometimes we can have conversations, and it's like, man, things don't feel awesome all the time right now, especially right in an election year, and it's so polarizing. Everything is so polarizing. There's a book called Humankind by Rutger Bregman. I think it's a 2021 book. And in this book, he asks this question, and I'm going to mangle this because I'm paraphrasing. I want to be clear about that. But he asks this question, and I want you to think about this. All right, so say you are, and for some of you, you don't have to say you actually are, someone who provides care for someone else. Could be a parent, could be a spouse, could be a child, could be anyone that you provide care for. This person is suffering from insomnia, right? They just can't sleep. Or if they can fall asleep, they don't sleep well. But, alas, there's a new drug on the market. This particular drug, in clinical tests, has treated some people with insomnia, but there are known side effects. The side effects are antisocial behavior, depression, and suicidal ideation. So we know those to be true. Are you going to let your loved one take that drug? Raise your hand if you're going to let your loved one take that drug. You would recommend that they take that drug. You would? I wouldn't. Not with my children, right? I wouldn't do it, right? If someone is an adult, then that's a decision they can make unless they're incapable of doing that. Because the consequences are too serious for me. He said, you know what that drug is? And these we know, right? Research bears out that these are the actual side effects. Who knows what the drug is? It's the news. Watching the news repeatedly leads to depression, antisocial behavior, and suicidal ideation. Why? Because the news is purposefully polarizing. right? It has to be salacious in order for you to watch it, right? And so it's important to think about what it is that we're constantly being bombarded with, especially for those of you who are students, right? That's why I hope that whatever education you pursue, there's a focus on criticality, right? You need to be critical consumers because you're constantly, you can look at your phone, you can look at your watch, you can look at, there's screens everywhere now, right? You're constantly being bombarded with information that you have to make decisions about. And I think that there's another point that I want to raise that I think is really important too. And it's this, I talked a little bit about this yesterday, in thinking about our current kind of socio-political realities. We have to be very clear about the difference between our values and our opinions, right? Because there's a difference. It's not just a nuanced difference, right? It's a protracted difference. So what's the difference? Which of the two should be malleable? Values or opinions? Which should be malleable? Which one should be static? Anybody want to take a guess? Huh? Opinions should be malleable, right? I know not everyone felt this way, but I asked this question yesterday. How many of you at one point in your life, be honest, nobody's going to laugh at you, believe that Santa Claus was real? That's an opinion. How come you don't believe Santa Claus is real anymore? Or if you do, I'm sorry. I didn't want to. No spoiler alert. My bad, y'all. If you don't currently believe that Santa Claus is real, what happened? What changed? Did your values change? Or did you get new information and your opinion changed? Your values should be static, provided they're egalitarian values. You believe in fairness. You believe that everybody has the right to be fully human, right? The right to pursue happiness, peace, all those different things. Those should be static. But when we conflate our opinions and our values, we always run into problems because opinions don't even have to be based on fact. Not even subjective fact. They don't have to be based on anything. I just feel this way, right? And so that's how we get ourselves in trouble. So we're going to talk about some of the things that we're fighting against. So who's heard this before? Anybody heard the term white supremacy, right? White supremacy culture. So what it means is that there is a system in place. Well, let me ask y'all a question first. I'll get back to this. What is racism? Who knows what I have a better question. I'm going to name 4 things, and I want you to tell me in your group. I'll give you a couple minutes. In your group, I want you to put these things in order, chronologically, okay? So listen, somebody has to write it down, not everybody. Which came first? It's like the chicken and the egg, right? White supremacy, race, racism, racialized capitalism. Those are the 4. And I want you to put those in order. So just call them, oh, you have to say it out because you don't have the numbers. All right.
Quick.
All right. So Bacon was someone who squandered his his inheritance. He came from a kind of well-to-do family. This is in 1676 in Virginia, right? And so there was someone who was the governor of Virginia. His name was William Barclay, and he essentially functioned as a CEO. His job was to keep wealthy, wealthy landowners happy, right? And so he also answered to the crown at that time, right? And so Bacon was upset that he squandered his living, and so he was no longer able to have the status that he desired, and he felt like the only thing precluding him from returning to that status was he needed land. He needed to be able to cultivate land, but there were indigenous people on the land. And so he went to the governor and he said, I need you to kick these people off the land. But the governor said, I have a good relationship, right, as good as a kind of rapacious, settler, colonial, genocidally violent relationship can be with the indigenous tribes here. So I offer them a wage for the land, and they accept the wage, and I don't want to jeopardize that just because you're disgruntled. And so apparently Bacon was a really good motivational speaker. So at this time they had something called headright systems. So a headright system is if you want to come to America from England, and I'm a wealthy landowner, you can't afford to pay. But every person that comes to America at that time was guaranteed 50 acres of land. So if I bring you both, even if you don't come, but I bring you and she's somehow related to you, then I get 100 acres of land for 7 years. That's what indentured servitude is, right? So you have to work for 7 years in order to pay off your debt to me. But the likelihood that you pay off your debt is low because when people came to this country, they didn't survive. They couldn't survive the diseases. They couldn't survive the weather, right? And so now it's another generation and more people want to come. I've already had this land for 14 years. You think I'm going to give it up easily? And you have no way to enforce it. So there were all these disenfranchised, lonely white men who had come from Europe, right, for the American dream, but it was a dream withheld. It was a dream deferred at that time. So Bacon went to them and he's like, guys, here's what's going on. We can be as prosperous, we can live this American dream if we can kick these indigenous people off the land. He won't let us, so we need to go to the Capitol, right, and we need to raise hay. And they're like, well, it's not enough of us. So then he did something that was incredibly problematic for the power structure. What did he do? He went and got freed and enslaved black people to work alongside him, right, for the promise of freedom, right, the promise of prosperity. And then they also duped some indigenous tribes into working with them, right? So eventually they, on their way to the Capitol, they massacred different indigenous tribes. They made it to the Capitol. They set it on fire. Barclay had to call the crown. They sent reinforcements, right? And the whole thing didn't last very long. But this is in 1676. 20 years later is the first time you see slave codes rewritten. It's a little bit more than 1702. So the slave codes were rewritten. And this is the first time you see black people considered to be slaves in perpetuity. What does perpetuity mean? Forever, right? Because indentured servitude is not different. Indentured servitude has a time limit. And so how did they do that? They had to switch something. So typically in Western societies, right, your lot in life at that time was determined by the patrilineal line, which meant what? Whatever your father was, that's what you were. If your father was free, you were free. If your father's enslaved, you're enslaved. But we switched it here in the United States to the matrilineal line. Why did we do that? No, it wasn't just because women couldn't own land. That maintained for hundreds of years after that. But it was because slave owners would impregnate enslaved black women, and they wanted those, their children to still be slaves, right? So that's why it switched to the matrilineal line. I don't know if y'all know this. There's a book called Slavery is Capitalism by Spin and Beckert. It's a 2020 book. And then in this book, they talk about the Industrial Revolution. And one of the things that characterizes the Industrial Revolution is mass production of the factory. You know what the factory is based on, according to this book? Anybody want to take a guess? Yeah? It's even more bleak than that. The wombs of black women were the first factories. That's what the factory is modeled after, because they produced a commodity, which was little black babies. At one point in our nation's history, 1/5 of all the wealth in this country was contained in the skeletal, muscular, endocrine systems of black people. They were the first liquid commodities. Black people were given as dowry. They were given as graduation presents, right? They were mortgaged and remortgaged prior to puberty, right? So because they could work harder. There's one apparatus that increased productivity on the plantation over 400% overnight. It's not the cotton gin. Do y'all know what it was? It's the whip. So it's always been about capitalism as far as I'm concerned. Capitalism birthed white supremacy in a society where people came here ostensibly for religious freedom, right? In the New Testament of the Bible, you can't own people in perpetuity, right? There's the year of Jubilee. People can marry out of it. There's all different things that take place, right? So for so-called Christians to own other people, there was a contradiction there. There was a tension there. In order to justify that, you then had to make these people who were enslaved not just less human than white people, but less than human, right? Hence the 3/5 compromise. Hence the continued stereotypes of black maleness and ape bestiality, all these different things, right? And so in order to justify the accrual of surplus value from the very bodies of human beings, white supremacy was birthed. White supremacy birthed this idea of race and then racism. So I would argue 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, so now we're going to talk about some of the things that, so I just want to go back to that. That's a lot to unpack. I'll pause for a second. Are there any questions about anything that I said? And this is, this is borne out in literature. This is not just my opinion. I've written about it. Many other folks have written about it. I have lists and lists of books that I can share if you want to dig in, if you're interested in these things, right? The reason that we're talking about these things is in order to create spaces. So what does DEI mean? Somebody tell me what DEI is, real quick. What does it stand for? Okay, all right. So, and I said this the other day. Y'all know what Morehouse College, anybody heard of Morehouse College? It's a historically black college in Atlanta. So if I take my brilliant friends back here who are racialized as white, right, I would argue there's no white people. There's people who are racialized as white. There's European people. There's Ukrainian people. There's all different kind of people. There are people who's racialized as white because it wasn't until the slave codes were rewritten in 1702 and codified that you first had this idea of black and white. Prior to that, people were just wherever they came from, right? So folks who are racialized as white, if I take these guys, my Nevada buddy, and take them to Morehouse, can I check a box and say that I've diversified it? Yeah, of course, right? Is that what diversity, equity, and inclusion is supposed to be about? No, it's not. So what has happened is it's become a checklist. It's become transactional. It's no longer transformative. So what we need to move towards, right, what you all need to, as students, insist on, is that your full humanity be recognized in the spaces that you occupy. What does that look like? Well, it's up to you to determine what that looks like. But I know one thing. I know that in order for your radical dignity and radical humanity to be recognized, you have to be able to have the full range of human experiences and not be castigated or sanctioned for it. What happens if you express disgust at something that a professor said? You think that's okay? You think it's going to be all right? I know I used to be the director of equity, and I dealt with student complaints. And so my professor did this thing, but I don't want to tell anybody. I don't want it to go any further than you because of fear of reprisal. I don't want my grade to be negatively impacted because of this thing. You know who it happened to overwhelmingly? It happened to women, right? Overwhelmingly, they would say, well, my professor put his arm on my shoulder. It was really, really awkward. I come from, even if this wasn't the case, but for this particular student, I come from a place where I have been abused, and that was triggering for me. I don't know how to address it because I don't want him to take it the wrong way. Nobody should have to live like that. I just had this situation with some of my sixth graders at my school. And so there was a sixth grader who told his grandmother that he liked a girl in class. They're both 11 years old. And the grandmother went all out for some reason and bought like a $60 Valentine bouquet for her. Right? It was just like a whole bunch of stuff, right? And the parents came to me, and they're like, well, he wants to give it to her, and we don't really know how we feel about that. And I was like, well, I know how I feel about that. And I think it's incredibly inappropriate for her to have to account for his feelings in the middle of class, even if it's not in the middle of class, if it's something outside that space, it's not okay, because I know both of them, right? And I know that whatever feelings he has, they're unrequited, right? It's one way. Even if it wasn't, it'd be super weird because I'm not matchmaking for 11-year-olds anyway, right? And I know they're parents, right? And so the whole thing for me was having a conversation about him. Well, I really want to do it, right? And he's like, well, can I give her less? Maybe can I just give her this? And I said, you can never single someone out and treat them, because the Valentine's Day exchange was the day prior. He wanted to do it the day after because it was special for him, right? And I said, you can't do that because you're making her account for whatever you have going on, and that's not fair, right? And it's a hard conversation for an 11-year-old. We're still working through it. He didn't quite get it. He's like, so I can't give her the chocolate. No, chocolate's going to melt. I'm like, all right, buddy, you got to eat the chocolate then. I don't know what else to tell you. Right? But the idea that students should have to account for, right, whatever kind of dispositional, idiosyncratic behavior that we are manifesting that particular day, and not be able to say anything about it, not be able to discuss a level of awkwardness or discomfort with it, because you can't really do that, because that's considered to be disruptive and disrespectful, right? Somebody says to me in class, hey, Dr. J, I don't like how you said that to me. Well, they can say that to me. They know that. Sometimes they abuse it, too. Even my own kids, when I tell them, hey, buddy, you got to stop doing that. You can hurt yourself. My son Freedom will say, and his name is Freedom, so it's my fault, right? Daddy, I don't like when you talk to me like that. You don't like when I tell you not to hurt yourself? I just don't like when you talk to me like that, right? So then we have to have a whole conversation about it, right? But the point is, they know they have space to be fully human. Sometimes human beings just don't want to hear what we have to say. They're not always as interested in the stuff that we're talking about, right? All these things are true. So for students, you have to insist, right, respectfully, that you're a human being that has rights that need to be respected. And as folks who are in spaces where we're blessed to be able to care for students, we have to be willing to put our egos aside and acknowledge that, right? That's how you create spaces of belonging. That's what radical inclusivity looks like. So my house, we moved out of the Bay Area. My house is pretty big now. Y'all can fit in my house. I have to put you in some different rooms. And we'd be tight. We'd be tight. But we can make it work, right? So say I had a dinner at my house, right? And I figured out, now it's an imaginary house because I couldn't do this at my house anymore. I figured out how to put everybody at a table. We're all sitting at a table together. So in kind of prevailing ideas of DEI, that's enough. Everybody's at the table, right? But at this particular table, because I love y'all, right, I've made some delicious food. And I can actually cook, too. My wife doesn't let me cook because I'm messy, but I can. If nobody's around, I'm home by myself, I can cook some stuff up. But so everybody's at the table, right? And we're having a feast. But this whole group of students here, right, and the folks that work with them, I didn't give them a plate or a fork or anything else. But they're at the table. I've diversified the table. You have some four-year folks, right, some community college folks. It's diverse. They're included. They're there, but they don't have any cutlery. They don't have any plates, right? And then you're vegan, right? I'm not saying you're, but you're vegan, right? But we decided to roast a goat, right? For me, that's an anachronistic version of diversity, equity, inclusion. We use those types of metrics to say that we're doing our job. We did it. We brought them all here. They're miserable, and they're starving, but they're all at the table. And sometimes we pat ourselves on the back for that. But radical inclusivity means that we give everybody what they need to be successful, right? And they don't have to sacrifice something. If for my vegan friend, right, it's not limited to just eating lettuce, right? I've prepared a dish. Actually, at that cafeteria over there, I had an incredible vegan dish. That was awesome. Whatever they made over there, it was some couscous stuff. It made myself hungry again. But what I'm saying is radical inclusivity is different than the way that we have operationalized, defined, and conceptualized inclusion for the past 15 years. It's not just about bringing people in. It's not just about being tolerant. It's about creating space for people to be radically human and celebrating that, celebrating the difference, embracing the difference. And so one of the things that I'm a huge proponent of is this idea of radical love as praxis, right? So praxis is a process. You have theory, you put that theory into action, and then you reflect on it. Did it work? Did it not? What can I do differently next time? How can I build on the momentum, right? How do I scrap this thing because it failed miserably? And so radical love as praxis doesn't mean that you love every single student, though that would be awesome. It means that you love justice, right? It's easy for me because my 4-month-old is Justice, right? But you love justice so much so that you are willing to change the way that you view the work that you do in order to accommodate all of the people that you serve. All right, so I'm going to move on. So we have a program. It's for Washington community college students. It's called IDEAL. It's the Initiative in Diversity, Equity, Anti-Racism, and Leadership. And so these students, we go through like an ethnic studies curriculum. It's 3 hours, I think, like every 2 weeks, and it's all virtual. We'll cover like a module that has to do with anti-racism, and then they take that information. Some of them have it already, some of them don't. They take the information and they use a tool. I know I'm hitting you with a lot of acronyms. Hopefully this is the last one for now. Called the Impact Equity Framework, which stands for Innovative, Measurable, Purposeful, Anti-Racist, Caring, Transformative. And it's a way to vet policies, procedures, and pedagogies. And so it's a way for students, because it's going back to what Fanon said, right? Sometimes you have to speak the language of the oppressor. So they're speaking the language of the institution, this institutional speak, so that people have to listen. So what they do is they use the information that they've gained, they take a policy, they put it through this equity framework, and then they make presentations on their campus, right? And some wonderful things have happened as a result. And so we had students who went to their, these are all community college students again, went to their campus and they said, we need better representation. We need to make sure that our trans friends feel welcome here as well. And so we want to do away with this binaristic bathroom signage, right? And so that was something that had been pushed for a long time, and they were finally able to do it because they were able to get with the people who can make decisions. They did their presentation. Folks were compelled by that, and they changed it. This is something that a student did. This went all the way up to as high as it can go, but it wasn't approved because everything happened in Washington just made it better for Amazon, I think. So they missed out on this one. But this is SB 5666, establishing a community or technical college student housing pilot program. This was for unhoused students, and so this is what they were trying to get passed at the state level. And they're still fighting this battle. They haven't given up, but this came out of the IDEAL program. There was a group of students who were domestic violence survivors, and so they got together, they did their impact equity work and presentation on, and I did not know this, I don't know, other folks may know this, how frequent it is that men are abused in relationships. Like, that blew me away. Just in this small cadre, we had maybe 30 students, there were like 5 males who shared stories of being abused. I grew up living in battered women's shelters because my stepfather was, I'll tell you what the student is doing anyway. Anybody know what the student is doing now? You want to guess? Standing right here. All right, so getting support for survivors on campus, right? So that's what happened as a result of this. And so I'm saying all this to say, because my time is almost up, I appreciate every one of you bearing with me on this Saturday morning. We are the ones that we've been waiting for. Even under the sea, we are the ones we've been waiting for. If you're free, you are not predictable and you are not controllable. All these things that have happened, and there's so many more examples. If y'all want access to it, just let me know offline. I'll put my email address up here, where students have taken initiative and it changed the world. And it seems small, right? It may start locally, but it will spread nationally. Eventually, it will be globally. If you have a heart, right, if you're dissatisfied with the way that things are, nobody's coming to save you. It's incumbent upon all of us to figure out that we're the ones that we've been waiting for. And so thank you for your time. I appreciate all of you. Come to the workshop. We'll do some more activities. We'll play a game. And I'm going to put my email address up here if anybody wants to reach out. And during lunch and the next session, there'll be time for Q&A. I just want to make sure that I honor y'all time so you can have a break now. So thanks again.
Dr. Sims, can we actually get another round of applause? That was amazing. I know I learned a whole lot right now. I hope everyone also learned a lot. We hope and encourage you that this will continue your DEI growth in the future. And